Okay, thanks everyone for sticking through a long day. It's 6:46 at night on the 28th of March, and this is our Democratic Caucus. So thank you for being here. I just have a few announcements that I want to make, and then we're going to call up a few folks to report on some bills. First up, I just wanted to say again, floor will remain the same this week, 1, 1, and 9:30. But expect long days, as you know, as we experienced today, and floor is going to go into the evening. Keep your snacks around. The caucus of the whole you just heard is going to be at noon tomorrow, and it's going to be on both the budget and the capital bill. So please be here for that tomorrow to ask your questions. And both of those will be on the floor Thursday and Friday. Oh, this one's important. We're closing in on a date for a potential veto session. Please hold the dates of June, is everybody writing it down? 20, 21, and 22. And please do not make any plans for those dates. Not sure which days it will be, but those are the dates we're closing in on. And as soon as we have it secured with the Senate, we will let you know what those final dates are. June 20th. 21st and 22nd. That's a Tuesday. No, it's usually, the question was, will it take 3 days? Usually it's 1 to 2 days. We usually schedule 2, but we still haven't secured a date. So we're holding those 3. That's a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I believe. Okay. Our target date for end of session this year is May 12th. But don't hold us to that. I always say this, but tell you, don't hold us to that. May 12th is the target date. Could be that day, could be the next day, and it could go late into the night that night. So just stay tuned on where we'll be, but that's our target date. I just wanted to let you know that. I've been getting a lot of feedback, and so has the Speaker's office, about the length of time of announcements on some of our days. So I'm just here to ask for you that if you are making announcements, please make them as brief as possible. It's very helpful to have brief announcements. And then if you have constituents that are in the chamber and they have already been announced that they've been in the chamber as part of a group, we ask you to please do not individually recognize them after they've already been recognized as part of a group. It just takes a huge amount of extra time, and that's our past practice. So thanks for following that past practice and helping us move stuff forward on the floor. Okay, that was it on my announcements. So I'm going to ask Representative Kornheiser to come on up, and she's going to give us a couple of heads up about bills from Ways and Means. I think there may be more than one. Is there more than one?
Yeah. Is everyone tired of my voice yet today? Because I'm tired of my voice. So Representative Beck is actually going to come up and talk about the yield bill, but just want to give like a little bit of broad strokes, especially for new members about it. The yield bill is a very short bill. There's a whole lot of numbers that back it up, but it's really like just a couple sentences that sets the yield, which sets our property tax rates. And so you can read the bill, less than a page. Most of the interesting part is in the fiscal note, so I encourage you to look at that. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Scott, who is, I think, our traditional Ways and Means yield bill reporter.
All right. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, this is the 2 pages, 2.1 billion. Pretty short, but it's a lot of money. So our strategy this year was to, as close mathematically as we could, to keep the income yield and the property yield and the non-homestead rate at the same level that we told school districts in the December 1st tax letter. And those are the numbers that they use to work with their budget people and their voters. And so the yields are, property dollar yield will be $15,479. Okay. The income yield will be $17,600, and the non-homestead property tax rate would be set at $1.386. Okay, and those are very, very close as close as is mathematically possible to those December 1 numbers. What that generates is the average tax bill goes up by 3.84%. Education spending went up 8%, but it's supported by a lot of underlying consumption taxes. The homestead rate in 23 was $1.386. In 24, it'll be $1.30.8. And the non-homestead rate went from $1.46.6 in 23 to $1.38.8 in FY24. Those decreases are masked, of course, by a lot of the CLA increases that a lot of our people in our districts are seeing. The effective income rate that our people that get the property tax credit receive will decrease from 2.32% to 3.11%. But effectively, that is a tax increase because most people, they're making more money in 24 than they're making in 23. And education spending increased by $125.7 million between FY23 and 24. And that's what drives part of much of the property tax bill increase. Also in section 2, this year when we had a $65 million head start because of more consumption taxes, mostly that we received than we thought we would receive in FY23. That's very unusual. Most years we have about a $20 million head start, and the thinking in committee is that to go from 65 to 20 would be a really, really tough thing for a lot of school districts to navigate. So what is built into these numbers is 22 million being set aside this year in a tax reserve, so that we're at least $22 million head start next year. And that'll hopefully kind of bring us in for this smooth landing as we get out of the COVID dollars into more of a normal revenues and things of that nature. So are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, if you have any between now and the bill, just let me know and I'd be more than happy to go through it with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And then just to be sort of clear, as people are preparing for next year, that extra reserve that we set aside to put towards tax rates next year, it's statutorily required to be put towards tax rates in the December and applied to the December 1st letter. It's not a reserve that we might be setting aside for other purposes that we are secretly plotting. It is a reserve towards tax rates next year. Also, a plug for, perhaps you've forgotten, we did a fantastic series of trainings in this very chamber at the beginning of the session. And so if you're sitting there wondering what Scott was talking about and you didn't want to ask any questions, there is a really great video right on your Ways and Means landing page on the left-hand side, Ed Finance 101, fun thing to listen to before you go to sleep tonight. Okay, so questions about the yield? Okay, I'm going to talk about another topic now. So in before times, for many decades, we did something in the Ways and Means Committee every few years, every 3 years, called a fee bill. And what that fee bill would do is it would update the fees that we apply all across state government. We have vast swaths of state government that you might have heard about before that are funded through fees, often into special funds that support the workings of specific departments. Some departments are designed to be funded through the general fund or the education fund or wherever else. But some of them are really specifically designed to be mostly funded through fees that people pay towards those services. Fees are explicitly to be set to meet the needs of that fund and the costs of that fund. They don't usually raise extra revenue that we get to then float around. Fees, unlike taxes, are usually a dollar amount, not a percentage. And so when you have a percentage and things change, all the things change. And so a percentage adjusts to inflation, and the procession of time. But a fee is a dollar amount, and so it does not automatically adjust to inflation or say the changes in costs or the number of people doing a thing that applies the fee. And so that's why we have historically had this fee bill every few years to update all of the fees. For the way the fee bill was created, and our own Carolyn Brannigan, who is back serving on the Ways and Means Committee, was the sort of keeper of the fee bill for many a biennium, is that the administration would offer essentially most of the information in the fee bill to us. Certain departments would be sort of on a schedule, and those departments would be clustered together, and the information we needed in order to adjust fees would be offered to us from the administration. It has been more than a decade since many of these fees have been adjusted. We have many funds that are deeply in the hole, that are being patched over in various ways, sometimes by under provision of services, sometimes by reallocation of general fund dollars that could be spent on something else, sometimes by not hiring. All kinds of things are happening because those funds are low. But we cannot offer a traditional fee bill with the information that the administration is willing and able to offer us at this time. In our last budget that we passed last biennium, we put in language that we thought would be sufficient to create a fee bill. The information that came back was not sufficient to create a fee bill, and so we are going to try harder to create more language that might be sufficient to create a fee bill next year. But in the meantime, we have some funds that are really desperately in the hole and need us to do something about it. And so there are a few areas of state government where we have been able to receive sufficient data from the administration for various reasons in order to adjust the fees of those departments. And what you'll see tomorrow, and honestly over the next few weeks and maybe months, is bills that will have very long amendments added to them by our Ways and Means Committee that adjust fees for departments that have a nexus to that bill. And so tomorrow we're going to hear about fees in the transportation bill, and we're going to hear about fees in one of, I think, our fourth nursing compact, our fourth, healthcare compact. The final compact that we're getting this year is, may not, the final of this half of the session before crossover, we're going to see fees attached to that to support the Secretary of State's office where there is one of the shortfalls. So I just wanted to give that like big picture framing about what's happening in these fees. I don't know if we want to take time to hear from the reporters of those two fee bills, but there are spreadsheets in the fiscal notes to dive in, but just, you know, to say this is the framework for why we're doing this that way, why it's being sort of pasted into separate bills and not as a fee bill. This is why we need to raise this revenue, is to make sure that we are delivering sufficient services. If you're curious about the transportation fund fees, please reach out to Carl, who will be reporting on that. If you're curious about the Secretary of State fees, please reach out to Julia, who will be reporting that bill. Thanks. Questions? Great.
Like none. Thank you. If anybody does have questions, reach out to Ways and Means. I'm going to call up, because we're talking fees, Carl, and we're going to have representative from, we're actually going to do transportation bill, and then the fees in there from Ways and Means. Okay. So I'll turn this over to the two of them.
Sure, I'm going to start, and then I'll send it. So hi, I'm Sarah Coffey. I'm the chair of Transportation Committee, and as Representative Kornheiser alluded, sometimes it gets exciting when your bill gets amended. But I want to kind of maybe start a little bit there just to speak to the revenue piece, how the transportation fund is funded. So tomorrow we'll be giving a floor report on H479, which we affectionately call the T bill, and we will be sending out by way of the House Clerk's office two documents that'll help you. We call this the Transportation on a Page, which will be coming to you. And there'll be a joint fiscal note that includes both the House Transportation Committee's bill is introduced and the amendments from both the Ways and Means Committee and the Appropriations Committee. But I thought maybe I'd start first to just say a little bit about why this is so needed with the transportation fund, because Vermont, like other states, supports its state transportation program using a mix of state and federal funding sources. Most of the state money used in the transportation budget comes from two statutory funds: the Transportation Infrastructure Bond, or you might hear the acronym TIB for the TIB fund, and the Transportation Fund. The Transportation Fund is comprised of DMV fees, motor vehicle purchase and use tax, gas and diesel tax, and other miscellaneous revenues. And these state revenues are so critical because they help us draw down federal dollars. As some people might be aware, it's often with these federal dollars, we need a 20% match in state dollars, and that's what our transportation fund does. So this year in the FY24 transportation budget, the governor recommended as a way to balance the FY24 budget by we have state revenues, but in the federal, it's a combination of state and federal dollars, but to balance it, let me back up. We've had a structural deficit growing in the transportation fund that was recognized back in 2022, where VTrans expected the funding gap would emerge this year, and it has. It's they thought it would be roughly 31 million. So this year, the governor is recommending taking 10.9 million from the general fund plus roughly 20.5 million in reversions and unspent funds from the T-bill, from T-funds. So I just wanted to give you that context as why there's a real reason that we need to fix this structural deficit. But beyond the very exciting Ways and Means amendment, there's some really good stuff in the T-bill. So this year, the FY24 transportation budget is $850.8 million, which supports a lot of critical infrastructure in Vermont. And historically, the fund, which is made up of state and revenue funds, is closer to 615 million. And that was kind of pre-COVID. But with the influx of federal dollars, it has really grown. And Vermont stands to gain a lot of wonderful opportunities. We stand over the next 5 years, we expect to receive 1.4 billion in federal aid highway formula funds, 225 million in bridge replacement repairs, 21 million for EV charging infrastructure, 77 million for public transportation and transit, and 28 million for airport infrastructure. So it's really exciting, really wonderful opportunities. There are also opportunities for us to apply for competitive grants to try to help us reach our climate goals in the state. So, but this does put with the increased budget, it puts some added pressure on the T fund. But I wanted just to give a couple of quick highlights and also just say that this is one of the bills in the House that we report, the number of committee members report the bill on the floor, and it takes a little bit of time, but I'll give you some really quick highlights. We're going to be we're really excited that we'll be codifying some of the incentive programs for new plug-in electric vehicles. This is a big deal. This includes the Mileage Smart program and the Replace Your Ride program. And it includes some eligibility to broaden eligibility, so we can accelerate the uptake in EV adoption in Vermont. And this, we currently have appropriated $12 million from last year that we expect to last for 3 years. So we are currently pretty well funded a few years out. And by codifying this program, we can always put in additional money. This is a sign that we want to probably put in additional money as moving forward. We're also creating an Electrify Your Fleet program with an investment of $500,000, more funding for e-bikes on top of the 100,000 that we got in the BAA. There's another 50,000. And we are authorizing work to begin some planning to design a mileage-based user fee. But that work will they'll have to come back, the administration will have to come back to the legislature to approve that plan. And then we also brought in a lot of elements of a bill, H101, a bill that was introduced by many members of the Climate Caucus, and includes initiatives to reduce carbon emissions, strengthen provisions for complete strengths, and make a stronger link between the work and recommendations that came out of the Climate Action Plan with our carbon reduction plan. So I think and lastly, and not least, is we are recommending an additional $1 million for Green Mountain Transit to be able to continue their fare-free and as bridge funding to develop a multi-tiered fare and modernized fare collection system. So it's been a long day, and I just wanted to give you those brief highlights. And feel free to reach out to me or any members of the committee if you have questions. But now I think I'm turning it over to Representative Demrow. We'll be talking about the amendment.
Well, this has been a long day, and I'll try and make this as brief as possible. So as you've heard from Chair Kornheiser and Chair Coffey, Ways and Means has an amendment to the T-bill, the purpose of which is to raise a broad range of transportation fees. Why are we proposing that? And you heard Chair Coffey talk about the hole in the T-fund. And that plugging that hole in the T-fund will help to take a bunch of pressure off the general fund as well, also important. And finally, that new revenue that will be generated by the fees, and we're estimating, JFO is estimating about $20.5 million in fees, that could be used to leverage an additional $82 million in federal dollars. So that's why, all right? So the what of it, there's about, not all of these fees, I haven't exactly counted up which ones, but somewhere shy of 149 different fees that will go up. And they'll go up using an inflator that JFO has come up with. The inflator is based on the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. Those of you might be familiar with the CPI. This is a different index than the CPI. It's a more modest index. And it adjusted from July of 2016, which is the last time any of these fees went up, to December of 22, it's about 19.8%. So that's the amount that the fees will go up. And they're rounded up to the uppermost whole dollar, but that's what we'll be talking about tomorrow when we present this amendment, or when I present this amendment on the floor. So any questions about any of those fees? It's a very broad range. It's everything from, your registration to getting a new driver's license to getting a duplicate driver's license. So, yeah. All right, seeing none.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you. So if anybody has any questions about this before tomorrow, see Representative Coffey and anyone on transportation, or Representative Demrow, or anybody on Ways and Means. All right, I'm going to call up Education Committee next. Representative Conlon and Representative Brady are going to report on 2 bills, I believe. Update on 483 and then school construction, am I right? Okay, I'll let you do that first.
Hi, everybody. H483 was carried over from last week, postponed for action this week, so it remains unchanged. But you will see in the calendar tomorrow a small amendment from the committee. And it's not terribly substantive. It mostly cleans up some language, corrects some errors. We left some language in the bill that refers back to something that isn't in there anymore, clarifies some dates, and doesn't make really any other changes except clarifying language. So that is what that amendment is. Otherwise, 483 is unchanged from when I presented it at Caucus last week. We are going to be on the floor with 2 bills. The other is our school construction bill. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Brady to talk about that.
All right. Peter's going to start tomorrow, and I will end the day with 486, an act relating to school construction. The bill has 2 major components. The first is to establish a school construction aid task force. This is not just any task force. This is going to be a really good task force that's going to get some really important work done for us. It will be a joint effort of legislators. Ultimately, there will be 4 on it once House Appropriations does a small amendment. The State Treasurer's Office, the Secretary of Education, several governor-appointed positions, the state toxicologist, and designees from several statewide education organizations. But most importantly, this task force is going to be put in place to act on the work that we did in 2021 in Act 72, when we set in motion a very comprehensive facilities assessment statewide. That assessment is coming back to us coming here in October 2023. We know it's going to show millions, if not billions of dollars of need in our public schools, and we want to be prepared to act in a deliberate and thoughtful way with that information. As many of you probably know, we have had a moratorium on any state funding for school construction since 2007. So the task force will do timely work coming back to us in January with recommendations, having used that statewide assessment. Specifically, they're going to consider programmatic needs, health and safety needs, funding options for a statewide school construction or perhaps school transformation program, a governance structure for an entity that could administer this statewide school construction program, appropriate state action levels for response to PCB contamination and whether the state should continue testing of indoor air for PCBs. And I think most importantly to the House Education Committee is criteria for prioritization in terms of how we spend our state dollars on construction. We heard along with Ways and Means compelling testimony from Rhode Island about the success of their statewide program and the importance of strategic priorities to incentivize wise investments that meet state goals. So the task force comes back to us with a report in January 2024, and hopefully we can move forward to create and stand up a school construction program in the 2024 legislative session. That's part 1 of the bill. Part 2, and it's really important that these are nested together because we want to do coherent, thoughtful work around facilities. This is expensive and important work in our state and investments. So part 2 is a pause of the PCB testing program and unreserving some funds that already exist for it. According to AOE staff that testified in the Education Committee, quote, "We are moving along with school construction, and PCBs are sort of like a bomb that could just drop into any school and blow up some very thoughtful strategic thinking. But at the same time, something has to be done this session to support those schools that are already in the mix. So we are seeking to address all facilities needs in a thoughtful way. We want to be careful that we aren't prioritizing costly PCB remediation in a building or part of a building that may need major renovations or even demolition." Vermont is currently the only state in the country pursuing PCB testing in all schools, and our state thresholds, our action levels which have changed in 2021 and 2022, are lower than the levels set by the EPA. We're attempting to build a wide-ranging program from the ground up, and it's proving to be cumbersome and difficult. Department of Environmental Conservation has already asked for another extension on testing out to 2026, given the staffing shortages and lab capacity. So how does this bill create a pause? Some specifics of how the pause on the PCB testing would work. Any testing that's already started when this bill passes, meaning the testing is happening on site, not the planning for it, but actual testing, would still continue. And if the testing in those schools reveals contamination, that school will be able to seek a grant from AOE for 100% of the cost of remediation or removal. All other testing would not move forward until the task force in section 1, hence the bill, both parts need to go together, submits its report to the legislature and the legislature approves further testing. The last part of section 2 deals with a chunk of money that is not new money. We have 32 million of the ed fund surplus that was reserved in the yield bill last year, sitting out there. Of that, just this past November, the Emergency Board transferred 2.5 million to AOE for immediate action in schools. So this bill would take any unspent funds from that, which right now is possibly all of it, and revert it back to the ed fund for school construction. and it would unreserve the remaining 29.5 million and use that funding to create a grant program through AOE to reimburse schools at 100% for remediation, removal, and potential relocation costs. Currently, any funding is through ANR, and they use an 80-20 cost share, and we've heard extensive testimony from the school community about how burdensome that may be. So it would unreserve that remaining 29.5 and up to 16 million of that 29.5 can be used to reimburse Burlington School District for demolition and removal costs related to very well-known PCB contamination levels. So that's school construction, facilities transformation, all together. Questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Looks like not.
Yay.
Okay, so thank you both. So if anybody does have any questions, please reach out to any members of the Education Committee or Rep. Brady or Conlon. Thanks. Last bill up is out of general and housing, and Representative Stevens is going to talk about the rental registry. Thank you.
I'll make my long day comment by saying that this is the long day's journey into night with this bill. A little bit of historical information on this bill. In 2018, this assembly created a rental housing advisory board. And in 2019, that board, which was made up of stakeholders as well as members of the administration, got together and put together a package of legislation, the bulk of which we actually passed last year, which included the VHIP program, which was the repairing offline apartments. It included what turned out to be the Land Access Opportunity Board, and a number of other things that came out in S210 and S226 last year. Thanks to the conversation by Representative Kornheiser, one of the reasons why this piece of the bill did not get included is because it has a fee in it. And the administration clearly has put out that they're not supportive of fees. So what got excised in our compromise of last year was this section about the rental registry. And it was originally tied into S210 in a way that these fees were going to be used for a service, and it was going to be paid for by landlords. And the services were going to be the upkeep of the registry, as well as paying for the Department of Fire Safety to hire enforcement officials across the state. In our compromise, the administration used general fund dollars to pay for the initial work in that enforcement division and left this piece out, again, because of the fee. What a rental registry is going to do for us in the middle of what we consider a housing crisis, we're not going to solve a housing crisis with anecdotal information about who has what apartments where in such and such town and how many are short-term rentals. If we don't know, the argument here, the intellectual argument here is if we do not have this data, how can we possibly address individual towns' needs and know where we have to go with our policy making? So this is going to ask or mandate that the towns that already do not have a rental registry, there's approximately 12 towns across the state that have functioning rental registries. Most, if not all of the towns are very happy with what the rental registries do. And they charge anywhere between $35 and $110 per unit. We're proposing, in our version of the bill, we are proposing a $35 unit fee. And the numbers that we used have been calculated in the past. And this would raise, depending on the percentage of apartments that got registered, anywhere between $750 and $1.2 million a year. What does the registry do? We're asking that in March 1st of every year, that if you've rented your apartment, either long-term or short-term, you register your apartment for $35, your unit. If you've already paid in Burlington or Brattleboro or Barry or St. Johnsbury, you don't have to pay twice. That information will just be ported into the state database. And this will give us, first, the idea of where these apartments are. I come from a town that was devastated, downtown was devastated by Tropical Storm Irene. And in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Irene, we could not help our residents find places because we didn't know where to go to find that information. It was not available on our town list, our town grant list. It's not available in your landlord certificates per se, or we don't have access to certain lists where this information may be possible. And so this was our attempt previously to tie this into the health and safety regulations that we moved from the Department of Health to the Department of Fire Safety. But now, because it's a standalone, we're just saying that we need this data in order to create policy. We also want this data so that we can inform property owners of the changes that we're making or programs that we're offering to them, which, as we all know, getting this information out that happens in this building doesn't get disseminated very easily out into the public. And so with the database, with contact information, we feel that we can help property owners understand what we're doing, when we're doing it, and what may be out there. For instance, we just handed out hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, whether it was from rental subsidies, whether it was subsidies to landlords to help them protect their properties or to fix their properties, whether it was to help tenants move. We have handed out hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're hearing feedback that not everybody knew about it. And so this is, again, an attempt to do that, is to provide the information to individuals. So what the bill, again, going through what the bill will do, we'll ask for a list of, ask for a list of data that will be put forward into a base. We have to create that database because it doesn't exist now. What we needed to do, again, in our version of the bill, we were going to ask for a fiscal note, and I'm sure if there's one been created, that's great. JFO would have asked ADS, the Agency of Digital Services, for an estimate on how much it would cost to build a database. The administration, not really supporting this project, wasn't going to give us a number in testimony. So what we asked for, rather than just the JFO note, is for the ADS to provide us with a two-step thing that what they do, and when we all pass bills and we're all being told that we have to go to ADS, we need an estimate. And that was something that we didn't have. So we are charging in this bill that ADS will do their contract, and then they'll do an RFI and get to the point before they would ask for an RFP, so that when we come back in January, we will have, from the administration, presumably, that we will have this information, and then we can push this, we can push this information and the cost estimates back out onto the floor to okay this final program. It's something that those of us who've been here for a while, we've been talking about this for so long that it feels like we're actually fixing it from something that we passed 5 years ago. But that's not the case. This still is not in law. We still do not have this information. We're still being shortchanged in how we can face up to the policy that we need to do for housing in the near future. And we think this bill is an important building block for that. Just very quickly, if I can go through it, there will be exceptions for units registered with another program or for units not offered to the general public. So if I have a house and if I have an extra apartment that I'm renting to my son, but I would never rent it to anybody else, I'm not registering that because it's not out for general rental. It doesn't become a public place. The registry data will not be subject to public records. The data can only be shared with government or other nonprofits or other persons to protect public health and safety, and the data cannot be used for commercial purposes. So property owners will not be inundated with, one of the things that was brought up offline from our committee was the Craigslist scams where people could get a hold of this information and whatever the Craigslist scam is, where people get abused by fake ads. That information will not be available to those folks just blindly. So it creates a special rental housing safety fund to operate the registry. There is a penalty if you knowingly do not register, and the report that's due from ADS would be in January of 2024. Then we put in 2 sections here that requires a report from the Department of Children and Families to implement crisis standards for housing in their GA programs. There's more information on that that I'll get to in a minute. And then the last section before the effective dates would require a report from the Agency of Human Services and a working group of stakeholders to provide recommendations on Vermont's homelessness response. We've asked for this, we've asked for this, and we've asked for this, and we haven't gotten it. So we're putting this back in. It's going to end up appearing in the budget, but it is really important when knowing that we have a June 30th deadline of what we're going to do, not only with folks in the motels, but the people who have been receiving rental subsidies for the last 3 years. They're being cut off if we, the body, doesn't do anything about it. And so we're just asking or demanding that this report be done. And again, there will be different language that comes out from an amendment or that language that's being put into the budget. So that's the Ways and Means Committee has changed this a little bit because of the ADS section of saying we want a number first. They're not putting the policy into place. They're proposing to not put the policy into place until we get the number, and then we can act on that. Again, we needed to determine the actual level of the fee we would want to charge for the amount of money that the program and keeping the program and the registry solid would cost. And so that will be in the Ways and Means Amendment that will follow our presentation. So.
Any questions? Comments? If not, see Representative Stevens or anyone else on general and housing. Tomorrow, this will be on the floor. So that's it. I hope you all get some rest tonight. Thank you all so much for being here for this.